I invite you to come with me today to John chapter 4, verse 4. The New Revised Standard Version reads, "But he had to go through Samaria." Today we will be talking about crossing boundaries. And in an effort to be responsible to the gospel that will come forth, I acknowledge that language is both the way to create and tear down boundaries. So hear the story, how I read it. Jesus had a bunch of haters. And so Jesus had to go. People started hearing that he had more baptisms under his belt than John. But they had it all wrong because it was his disciples doing the baptisms. But what matters is that he had to leave Judea and head for Galilee. He begins to walk. We don't know how old Jesus is, but we can assume that he was an adult who was familiar with the land, familiar with it enough to know the route it would take to get to his destination. And what we know from the text is that most times Jews would go the long route to get from Judea to Galilee. Tradition had already determined that Samaria was an uncomfortable place to be in, but Jesus went anyway. And there he is, he sits down at a well. This well was built by Jacob and is known to be one of the deepest wells in Palestine. It's 12 o'clock, so it's hot, and Jesus, because he's having a human experience, is probably dehydrated. And a woman comes to the well. It was not custom for anybody to come to this well at noon. People would often come to the well early in the morning or late at night because it's just too hot. But here is this woman coming to the well, and Jesus asks the woman for a drink. He doesn't ask for her name, and neither does the text give her a name. So the woman remains nameless in the text. But I believe that people have names and their names matter. So I found out in my research that recent scholars and Christian practitioners in the Eastern Orthodox and Catholic tradition have come to name her. She is held up in this light as an apostle, and even to some, a holy martyr. And I cannot pronounce her name correctly, and so I won't name it, but I will give her a nickname, and that nickname will be Tina. Is that all right? Jesus asked Tina for a drink of water. And Tina says to Jesus, "First of all, why are you asking me, a woman and a Samaritan, for a drink of water?" Perhaps we know Jesus and his social location at this point, and we like to see Jesus as being the one at the bottom. But this text suggests that he has a lot going for himself. He is in her country, which he's not supposed to be doing, and now he's about to take a drink, and hell should be freezing over. He responds to the question, "If you had asked me for a drink of water, I would have given you that drink of water. I would have given you more." He says, if you knew the gift of God and who I am and what I've been sent to this earth to do, you would be asking me for water, and the water that I have to offer is living water. Tina says, well, first of all, sir, you don't have a bucket. And second of all, this well is deep, so you need a bucket. And by the way, where is this water that you're talking about? Because my ancestors built this well. And are you better than them? We've been living off of this water for centuries. How could your water be better? Y'all hear her smacking her teeth and rolling her neck? Tina says, who is this man? Who does he think he is? And let's see what this is about. And they go back and forth, and they are engaging in dialogue. They are crossing boundaries, and it's hot outside, and I'm sure Jesus is parched, as is this woman, but here they are talking at the well. Jesus says, go and get your husband. Jesus says to Tina, I see you and I know you quite well. And it is now that Tina begins to identify Jesus as a prophet. She says, you know, you're different. You're not quite what I assumed you would be. The story goes on, but if I could wrap it up, I'd say that eventually the disciples make it to the well and their dialogue comes to a close. Eventually the woman gets up, and we know from the time that she began this interaction until the disciples show up, something has happened. We know something has happened because she gets up, and she gets up excited. She gets up transformed. She gets up ready to go tell the community that she is a part of, y'all got to come see this man. First of all, he knows that I'm a polyamorous pansexual who just can't commit because that's the life that I chose. And he accepted me for who I am. And we had a whole conversation about worship and spirit. You have to come see this man. He has to be the Messiah. Come and see it for yourself. By the end of this interaction, the entire village have come to know and find out about the liberating love of Christ from that day forward. Dearly beloved, we, like Jesus and Tina, live in a complex world. A world where our boundaries are distractions. We live in a complex world with varying views and perspectives, racial and ethnic backgrounds, political affiliations. The church, which exists in the world, whether we want to believe it or not, is facing some difficult challenges. I am queer and you are not. I am progressive and you haven't gotten there yet. I grew up in church all of my life and you didn't. I went to college and you did not. I traveled and you did not. I'm rural and you're urban. A lot of times opposing groups exist and fight amongst each other when they live in the same community, when there is lack, yet they can't seem to be in the same room together. But if you don't take anything else from this sermon today, hear me when I say, if I need water and you need water, then what does it matter that my well is deeper than your well? We both have a shared desire to live and be the best that we can be, and when we refuse to step outside of our boundaries and our comfort zones, when we know that Christ has called us to do so, we miss the mark and we all die of thirst. Let us not forget that community is forged out of a shared desire to be loved infinitely, to be able to draw from the never-ending wells of radical love and hospitality. And my prayer is that we are individually and collectively creating space for all those who come to the well parched and embarrassed, that we are honest about our own thirst as we provide drink for others, because you cannot pour from an empty cup. In order for God's kingdom to truly reign and liberation to be a reality in our lifetime, we must be willing to cross the boundaries that our traditions have set. Jesus wants us to be saved, but Jesus also calls for us to be whole. Too often, salvation is more about the Savior than it is about the human who comes to the well thirsty, the fullness in who they are, mind, body, and soul. But Jesus and this boundary crossing experience also calls for us to be free from the chains that bind the kind of radical hospitality that we witness in this story. Jesus calls us to cross the boundaries of our traditions, our denominational polities, our class backgrounds, to make ourselves accessible to the people and the places where there is drought and there's thirst and there is embarrassment for not knowing what we know. And in the process, we become transformed in the service of the work. We become new people, better people, committed to a greater purpose, one where salvation and liberation are tied up together. I want us to understand that Jesus engages in a dialogue with this woman. I also want us to understand that Jesus and his own life and his own ministry is no longer the same from that very day. His humility allowed for the power of an exchange to grow his ministry, to make his ministry accessible to a people who otherwise would have never come to know Jesus. If Jesus could come to this earth to be human, to have a human experience, then Christ's presence in our lives ought to be tangible enough for us to be in solidarity with those who suffer. I want us to imagine the times in our own lives when we've been in need, the times when we've been down way down yonder by ourselves and couldn't hear nobody praying. I remember that feeling. In fact, my relationship to this text comes out of my solidarity with the woman more than it does with Christ. I only know the radical love of Christ because someone looked beyond where I was from, my southern accent, my gender, and my disposition to a new world where black girls were not invited. Someone saw me, and they saw my potential, and they saw my gifts when I didn't have the most expensive clothes and the most fancy jewelry. Someone saw me when I wrestled with what it meant to be the first in her family to go to college. Someone saw me and they offered radical hospitality. And they forged an authentic relationship, getting to the heart of who I was, both human and divine. And this is how I know Christ. One who seeks an authentic relationship with those he came into contact with, seeing the human and the divine with compassion and love and mercy and grace. It's that authentic relationship that makes disciples, that values discipleship and the true formation of community over conversion. I come to say that when we cross boundaries, we become transformed. We build a community that is based on shared needs, and we become more effective in our ministries. But we will never know if we don't go. If we don't go with the intention of being transformed our very selves. The Samarias in our lives, they come to bring us healing. They come to show us our humanity, to show us what accountability looks like. If we are followers of Christ, the crucified Christ, the one who hears and knows and sees and identifies with the oppressed, with the downtrodden, the wells of our love are deep enough for all to come and drink without false pretense. And that's the sacred power that Jesus and his ministry brought to this earth. Christ and his love is tangible. It is meant to be known and to be felt amongst all of God's creation. Because in God's economy, everybody eats. In God's economy, everybody drinks. In God's economy, everybody has shelter. In God's economy, everyone has access to healing. In God's economy, there are enough seats at the table for all to feast. So when we pass by Samaria, as I come to a close, when we fail to stop in Samaria, we neglect our own thirst. Our identities are forged in the times when those of us who dare to name ourselves religious and spiritual cannot be human enough to stop glorifying suffering. It is up to us to return to the Samarias in our lives, to find the Samarias in our lives, because we are called to go into the uncomfortable places, to find and seek out our people. Go to Samaria, save and be saved.